Revenge simmered in the veins of every individual for centuries as they envisioned the moment when they would hold the Galactic Council accountable for eradicating Earth. David Williams stepped forward at the Teran Museum of Galactic History, his gaze intense as he addressed the audience. Descendants of the fortunate few who fled Earth 500,000 years ago filled the auditorium. The Galactic Council arrived at our ancestral planet Earth, David stated firmly, projecting images of the planet's former glory and its subsequent destruction. The Council, led by aliens, deemed humanity unfit for the galactic community, branding them as violent savages. Humanity faced an ultimatum: surrender or face annihilation. Refusing to be subjugated, Earth was ravaged, leaving behind a desolate wasteland. Despite the devastation, millions escaped aboard colony ships, scattering across the stars. For eons, they endured in exile, rebuilding and awaiting their chance for retribution. David revealed a long-awaited secret that promised to turn the tide in humanity's favor, igniting anticipation among the audience. With determination, David embarked on a mission aboard a stealth shuttle, accompanied by Evan and Jason. Their journey led them to Zephrus Prime, where they encountered ancient ruins brimming with mystery and danger. As they navigated through the ruins, they faced unexpected challenges, including automated defenses. Yet, David remained resolute in his quest for justice. Emerging from cover, Jason unleashed his pulse rifle on the turrets, only to find his shots futile against the shimmering force shields. "It's no use," Jason called out, recognizing the shield's alien design. "Can you hack them?" David shouted back. Jason, utilizing his cybernetic implants, worked on the task. "Give me a minute," he replied. Suddenly, the turrets fell silent as Jason grinned, boasting about his past council days. Advancing cautiously, they entered the structure, its cavernous interior illuminated by eerie pulsing strips. Consoles blinked with alien technology, but it was the holographic display of the galaxy that drew David's attention. Stars glittered, some systems highlighted in red, including Earth. Shocked, David exchanged glances with Evan and Jason, pondering the connection between their lost home and these ancient ruins. Zooming in on the holographic map, David observed crimson dots marking alien strongholds, each potentially harboring devastating firepower. Jason pointed out a secret research station rumored to develop a new doomsday device for the Council. Recognizing the imminent threat, David froze as the sound of approaching footsteps filled the chamber. Taking cover, they watched as Elysian soldiers, led by Commander Gailey, entered, his presence chilling David to the bone. Gailey ordered his men to secure the area, revealing plans for a new weapon deployment awaiting Council approval. Determined to thwart the aliens' sinister agenda, David, Evan, and Jason trailed Gailey deeper into the complex, navigating shadows with pounding hearts. They reached a cavernous hangar, where sleek, deadly Elysian warships awaited. Seeing Gailey boarding one of the ships, David knew they had to act swiftly to prevent humanity's downfall, exchanging grim nods with his companions before following the enemy into the darkness. The hangar bustled with activity as flight crews rushed to prepare the fleet for launch. David quickly made a decision. They needed to board that ship to reach the research station in time. Evan agreed solemnly, following David's lead as they dashed across the hangar floor, staying low to avoid detection. Gailey's ship loomed above them, its boarding ramp still extended. With a final check for any observers, David sprinted up the ramp, Evan and Jason close behind. They found refuge in a shadowy alcove just as the ramp sealed shut, the ship's engines roaring to life. Sharing a tense moment, they acknowledged the perilous mission ahead. With humanity's homeworld destroyed, David was determined to prevent the aliens from extinguishing the last hope of his species. The thirst for vengeance burned fiercely within him as they prepared to confront the Council. On board the Elysian warship, David, Evan, and Jason huddled in a cramped maintenance shaft, the atmosphere thick with sweat and fear. Soldiers patrolled nearby, their voices echoing through the corridors. Jason accessed the ship's schematics, identifying a high-security section below. Moving cautiously through the ducts, they encountered elite guards stationed outside a sealed door. Jason skillfully bypassed the lock, granting them access to a dimly lit chamber. Inside, they found Dr. Ramsey, a battered figure confined within a force-shielded cell. Recognizing David, Ramsey explained his capture and forced involvement in developing a devastating new weapon for the aliens. Determined to rescue him and thwart the enemy's plans, David deactivated the force shield, ready to confront the looming threat. Evan drew in a sharp breath, The aliens possess a planet killer, he stated grimly. Ramsey nodded in agreement. An energy cannon of immense power, fueled by novarium. An extremely rare and volatile element, Jay added. I've heard whispers about that. They say it's found on only a couple of planets in the entire galaxy. The aliens have already extracted enough to charge the cannon for one shot, Ramsey confirmed. And they're aiming it at Neo-Terra, he added, sending a chill down David's spine. We have to stop them, he insisted. I know, Ramsey said, producing a data chip from his worn jumpsuit. I managed to steal the schematics for the weapons research facility. It shows the cannon's weak points. You have to get this data to the Neo-Terran military. Their conversation was interrupted by blaring alarms and flashing red lights signaling an intruder alert. They know we're here, Jay remarked, tossing Ramsey a spare pulse pistol. You know how to use one of these? Ramsey nodded. I've had some practice recently. Before they could act, the door to the cell block exploded inward, revealing Commander Gailey and a dozen elite commandos. Surrender, human scum, Gailey bellowed. Go to hell, Gailey, David retorted, diving for cover as plasma bolts filled the air. Jay and Evan returned fire, their energy beams finding their marks amidst the chaos. But the aliens pressed on, forcing them into a retreat. As they fought, Ramsey was struck by a bolt and fell. David rushed to his side, receiving the data chip from Ramsey's urgent grasp. Stop the weapon, Ramsey whispered before succumbing to his injuries. Tears stung David's eyes as he pocketed the chip and rejoined the fray. With Jason wounded, they made a desperate escape to the maintenance shaft. There's an escape pod bay on this deck, Jason panted, directing them with his implant. They reached the pods, leaving a trail of blood behind. Evan launched the pod as more troops closed in. As they hurtled through space, the reality of their narrow escape sank in. Dr. Ramsey's dying words echoed in David's mind, fueling his determination to use the data chip to save humanity from the aliens' genocidal plans. He glanced at Evan and Jason, recognizing the grim determination mirrored in their eyes. They had a mission now, a purpose. Set a course for the nearest Neo-Terran outpost, David instructed. We have to get this data to the military. It's our only hope of stopping that weapon. As the escape pod accelerated into the void, David realized this was just the beginning of their fight to save Neo-Terra and avenge the fallen of old Earth. The pod shuddered and lurched as it plummeted through the atmosphere of Nemesis. Red warning lights flashed, and David gripped the armrests tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Evan tended to Jason's wounds in the rear compartment, trying to stem the bleeding with a medkit. With a bone-jarring impact, the pod slammed into the planet's rocky surface, skidding to a halt. David kicked open the hatch and emerged, pulse rifle at the ready. Nemesis sprawled before him, a desolate landscape of jagged obsidian spires and bubbling lava pits under a bruise-colored sky. Evan, help me with Jason, David called out. Together, they carried their injured comrade out of the pod and laid him on a flat slab of rock. Jason groaned as Evan tended to his wounds. Guess I'll live, he muttered through gritted teeth. David consulted the schematics on his datapad. We're on Nemesis, he announced. And if I'm reading this right, there's an alien base not far from here, one of the ones marked on that holographic map. Of course there is, Evan remarked dryly. Nothing's ever easy, is it? Gathering what supplies they could salvage, they set out across the harsh landscape, with David leading the way, Evan supporting Jason. The heat was oppressive, sweat soaking through their clothes. An hour of hiking brought them to the base of a towering mesa. Consulting the schematics again, David located an access tunnel on the north side. Jason managed to hack the lock with his implant, and they crept inside, weapons at the ready. Navigating by the glow of Evan's flashlight, they entered a cavernous chamber filled with dormant battle droids and racks of pulse rifles. Quite the arsenal they've got here, Evan remarked softly. Moving deeper into the base, they reached the control room, dominated by a massive holographic display. David quickly began downloading files onto a portable drive. It's all here, he breathed. The super weapon, the narium, the targets. They're going after Neo-Terra, Proxima Colony, Epsilon Rani, and a dozen other human worlds. Evan's face paled at the revelation. They want to wipe us out. Finish what they started with Earth, he muttered. David growled in defiance. Not if we have anything to say about it. He ejected the drive and prepared to leave, but an alarm siren pierced the air. Intruder alert, a robotic voice blared. All security forces mobilize. Damn it. They know we're here, Jason said, tension mounting as they braced themselves for the confrontation ahead. It seemed they had triggered a silent alarm. Boots pounded in the corridors outside, harsh shouts of alien soldiers reverberating off the metal walls. David and Evan helped Jason to his feet. We have to fight our way out, David declared, tossing Jason a pulse rifle. Are you good? Jason nodded, hefting the weapon. I'll manage. Let's give these bastards hell. They burst out of the control room, guns blazing. The first squad of Elysian troopers fell under a hail of searing blue plasma bolts. David led the charge through the winding corridors, with Evan and Jason providing covering fire. Alarms blared and energy beams crisscrossed the air as they battled their way to the surface, leaving a trail of shattered battle droids behind them. Emerging from the tunnel into the scorching heat of Nemesis, they found themselves confronted by a towering alien mech. It was a nightmarish amalgam of gleaming black metal and bristling weapons, its cockpit shielded by a glowing force field. Commander Gailey's voice boomed from the mech's speakers, demanding their surrender. But David remembered something he'd seen in the database, a structural weakness in the mech's leg joints. He raised his rifle and took careful aim. Evan, Jason, he shouted, concentrate your fire on the legs, just below the knee. They poured plasma into the mech's joints, the superheated bolts searing through layers of armor. The machine staggered and sparked as its legs buckled. Gailey screamed in rage, but it was too late. The mech toppled, crushing its cockpit against the rocky ground. David advanced on the wreckage, rifle trained on Gailey's broken form. The Elysian commander coughed up blood, his face contorted in hate. You think you've won? He rasped. You're too late. The weapon is already being assembled. His words were cut off by a gurgle as blood filled his mouth. David stared down at Gailey's body, a cold fury settling in his gut. The aliens were moving faster than he'd feared. We need to get this data to Neoterra, he declared, holding up the drive. Warn them what's coming, and then we're going to find that weapon and destroy it, no matter where it is. Looking to Evan and Jason, he saw the same grim resolve in their eyes. They were battered and exhausted, but they weren't beaten. The fight was just beginning. Bursting from the escape pod, they made their way across the landing pad, the data drive feeling like a lead weight in David's pocket. Each step sent pain lancing through his bruised ribs, but he pushed it aside. There was no time for weakness, not with what he knew now. Bursting into the Defense Council chambers, they caused the uniformed men and women to look up in surprise. Dr. Williams, Admiral Vasquez said, rising from her chair, we'd heard your mission was a failure, that you were lost with all hands. My demise has been exaggerated, David declared as he placed the data drive onto the table. We retrieved this from an Elysian base on Nemesis. Vasquez inserted the drive into her console, her expression growing grave as she reviewed its contents. Is this accurate? She asked. David nodded solemnly. The aliens possess a planet killer, a superweapon fueled by novarium, and they intend to test it on Neoterra. Chaos erupted in the room, officers clamoring over each other. Vasquez slammed her palm on the table, silencing the commotion. Are you certain of this? She demanded, fixing David with a piercing stare. Absolutely, Evan interjected. We saw the schematics ourselves. The weapon is real and nearly operational. Vasquez muttered a curse under her breath. I want a full analysis of this data, weaknesses, vulnerabilities, anything we can exploit, she ordered. David added, that's not all. We know where they're constructing it. Vasquez leaned forward, intrigued. Where? In the heart of Galactic Council space, David replied, displaying a star map and zooming in on a remote sector. There's a secret research station. That's one of the most heavily defended locations in the galaxy, Vasquez remarked. Which is why we need to strike now, David emphasized, before they finish the weapon and relocate it. Vasquez studied the map, her expression tense. It would be a suicide mission, she acknowledged. David pressed. What choice do we have? If that weapon is completed, every human colony is at risk. After a long moment of silence, Vasquez nodded. Assemble a strike team, Dr. Williams, the best we have. This council authorizes any and all measures to neutralize the threat. Relief washed over David. Thank you, Admiral. Don't thank me yet, Vasquez cautioned. You still have to pull this off. She stood tall, addressing the room. This is it, people. The fate of our species hangs in the balance. Let's make sure we're on the right side of history. In the following days, David immersed himself in mission preparations, carefully selecting his team. But doubts gnawed at him. However, his concerns were interrupted by a cryptic message, promising vital information for their mission. It instructed him to meet alone at specific coordinates, a mysterious offer that added another layer of uncertainty to their already perilous mission. David followed the coordinates to a desolate spot on the outskirts of the capital. Every instinct warned him it could be a trap, but the possibility of the mysterious sender aiding them in destroying the alien weapon compelled him to investigate. He owed it to his team, to humanity. The meeting point was an abandoned warehouse, the kind seen in shady deals and double-crosses on holovids. David entered cautiously, hand on his holstered pulse pistol. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in a hood. "Dr. Williams," a raspy voice greeted. David's eyes widened as the hood lowered, revealing a face he hadn't expected to see. Gailey. "Gailey," he breathed. The alien commander's scarred visage bore witness to their past encounters. "How?" David began, his pistol ready. Gailey spread his hands, explaining his defection and desire to stop the Council's madness. David remained skeptical, but Gailey offered vital information and assistance in exchange for amnesty and revenge. Reluctantly, David accepted, taking the data chip containing facility schematics. "If you betray us," David warned, "I'll put you down myself." Gailey grinned, and David couldn't shake the feeling of dealing with the devil. But if it meant saving Neoterra and humanity, he'd pay any price. With trembling hands, David inserted Gailey's data chip into the stolen ship's console. The codes worked, allowing them to slip past the facility's defenses undetected. As the supply ship touched down in the hangar, David briefed his team on the plan. Evan and Gailey would accompany him to the control room, while Maya, Tyler, and Anya would rig the assembly area to explode. They split up, navigating the stark metal corridors with grim determination, pulse rifles at the ready. Gailey led them through the maze of corridors, guided by the map on his datapad. Tense shouts and the crackle of energy blasts suddenly filled the air as Elysian soldiers poured into the hallway, firing at them. David and his team sought cover, returning fire as plasma scorched the walls around them. Tyler's hit. Samir yelled over the comm, "Anya, can you cover us?" "I'll hold them off," Anya replied tightly. "Get him out of here." David gritted his teeth, focusing on their objective. They had to reach the control room. After several tense minutes of fighting, they arrived at the heavily guarded door. Elite Elysian commandos stood sentry in full tactical gear. David and Evan took up positions while Gailey worked on overriding the lock. "I can override the lock, but it'll take time," Gailey said urgently. "We need to." The door exploded outward, sending them sprawling. David's head collided with the wall, stars bursting across his vision as he struggled to his feet. Elysian commandos surged through the smoke, their energy blades flashing. Gailey charged forward, taking down two before a blade pierced his chest, causing him to collapse. Blood pooled beneath him as David and Evan laid down covering fire, pushing the commandos back. With a final nod of respect, Gailey urged David to finish the mission. David sprinted for the control room, sealing the door behind them. They quickly jacked into the systems, fingers flying over the keys. "We're in," David barked into his comm. "Now what's your status?" Static crackled in his ear. Then Samir's voice came through, reporting that bombs were planted, but they were cornered. David faced a crucial decision. Complete the mission or risk everything to save Samir. The fate of Neoterra hung in the balance. With grim resolve, David turned to Evan and declared they were going after her. They charged out of the control room, guns blazing, determined to reach Samir despite the odds. As they fought their way deeper into the assembly area, David steeled himself for what lay ahead, the daunting task of disabling the superweapon and saving Samir, no matter the cost. "Cover me," David shouted to the others as he armed the charges. They formed a perimeter, energy blasts filling the air. Sweat dripped into David's eyes as he worked. Almost there. Suddenly, a flare of light filled the chamber. David spun, rifle raised, then faltered as a towering hologram dominated the space, the translucent figure of an Elysian in ornate armor. Could only be Ali, the architect of this nightmare. "Dr. Williams," the warlord said, his voice silk and purr. "You have fought well, but surely you see the futility of this path." "Funny, I was about to say the same to you," David retorted. He placed the final charge, his finger hovering over the detonator. Ali chuckled, speaking of potential wasted on misguided loyalty. Join us, Dr. Williams, he urged, or watch as your precious Terra burns. David hesitated, the offer tempting, a chance to end the conflict. But he couldn't betray everything he believed in. Slowly, deliberately, he activated a hidden transmitter. I have a counteroffer, David said, echoing through the chamber. How about you take your glorious future and shove it up? Ali's face twisted in rage as he realized his words were being broadcast. The hologram vanished, replaced by blaring alarms. Elysian soldiers poured into the room, but David was already moving, his team falling back to defensible positions. They held the line, energy bolts filling the air, buying precious seconds. David armed the last charge and sprinted for the exit, the world turning white as the explosives detonated. A searing wave of heat and noise flung David from his feet, but he dragged himself upright, the weapon gone, Zen's fleet in tatters. David limped through the ruins, finally finding Evan and Samir alive but battered. Later, he interrupted. For now, let's get the hell out of here. As they made their way to the extraction point, Samir pressed a data drive into David's palm, a way to take down the council for good. The battle was won, but the war far from over. Still, for the first time in years, David allowed himself a flicker of hope. The destruction of the superweapon sent shockwaves through the galaxy, oppressed species rising up in rebellion. But even as Zion mobilized his forces, a new horror was unleashed. A virulent bioweapon sweeping through the human colonies like a plague. Millions perished in agony, their bodies ravaged by the engineered virus. Millions more were infected, condemned to a slow, painful demise on the colony of New Carthage. Evan fought alongside a ragtag group of survivors, holding off wave after wave of Elysian shock troopers. His skin was pallid, his eyes feverishly bright, the virus burning through his veins. A mother and her child cowered behind him, whimpering in terror. Evan gritted his teeth, firing his rifle with precision, dropping Elysian soldiers one by one. But still, more kept coming, an endless silver tide. Get to the shuttle, Evan rasped to the civilians. I'll hold them off. The mother hesitated, tears streaking her face. Come with us, please. Evan shook his head. I'm already dead, but you still have a chance. Go. Live. With a last anguished look, the mother grabbed her child and fled for the waiting shuttle. Evan turned back to the oncoming horde, a grim smile on his lips. He charged forward, fighting until his last breath. A dozen Elysian corpses piled at his feet as the light faded from his eyes. He thought of David, of the mission. It was up to him now. David slammed his fist into the wall, grief and rage threatening to consume him. Evan was gone, his best friend, his brother in arms, cut down by Ali's cowardly attack. But there was no time to mourn. The war still raged, billions of lives hanging in the balance. David gathered his forces, every soldier and ship still able to fight, for a final, desperate assault on the Council's headquarters. They came like an avenging tide, human and alien rebels united against their common enemy. Elysian defenses crumbled under their onslaught. The gleaming spires of the Council's citadel soon breached. David fought his way to Ali's sanctum, cutting down the warlord's elite guard. Bursting into the throne room, rifle leveled at Ali's heart, the Elysian tyrant laughed coldly. You think you've won, human? You think this is the end? He rose from his throne, his body a fusion of flesh and advanced Elysian tech. David fired, but Ali's energy shields absorbed the shots. The warlord backhanded David across the room, sending him crashing into a pillar. Rising, spitting blood, David charged back in. They traded blows, David's skill and determination against Ali's augmented might. It was a losing battle. Every punch David landed met with a dozen crushing strikes from Ali. David fought on through a haze of agony, unwilling to fail, unwilling to let Evan's sacrifice be in vain. In a moment of desperate inspiration, David remembered Samir's data drive. With his last strength, he plugged it into his suit systems and broadcast the shutdown command to Ali's implants. The warlord froze, his cybernetic body betraying him. David hammered blow after blow into Ali's suddenly vulnerable form, pounding him to the ground. Standing over the beaten tyrant, rifle aimed at Ali's head, every instinct screamed at David to pull the trigger, to end the monster's life and with it the war. But Ali, even in defeat, laughed. Go ahead, kill me. Changes nothing. The bioweapon was just the start. We have more hidden throughout the galaxy, countless plagues and horrors waiting to be unleashed. If you persist in your resistance, your species will suffer for generations. David hesitated, the enormity of the choice weighing on him. Could he doom humanity to unending torment for the sake of vengeance? In the end, he lowered his rifle. I won't let you turn me into a monster too. The war ended with a whimper, not a bang. A tense ceasefire, a begrudging truce, and the aliens withdrew. But the threat of their doomsday weapons loomed over every negotiation. David returned to Neoterra hailed as the savior of humanity, but amidst the cheering crowds, all he felt was the crushing weight of the compromises he'd made, the friends he'd lost. He stood on a balcony, looking out over the war-torn city. The scars would heal in time, but would the deeper wounds left on the galaxy's soul ever truly mend? David didn't know. All he knew was that the fight was far from over. In the shadows, new threats gathered. Old hatreds festered. The cycle of violence and retribution would continue, a never-ending dance of destruction. But for now, for this one moment, there was a fragile peace, and that would have to be enough. David stared out the window of his small, Spartan apartment on Neoterra. The city stretched before him, a patchwork of rebuilt structures and lingering ruins, a testament to both humanity's resilience and the scars of the war that still haunted them all. He turned away, unable to bear the sight any longer. The truce with the aliens had held for years now, but at what cost? Evan was gone, sacrificed for a peace that felt more like a slow death, and the knowledge that the aliens still possessed the means to annihilate them all at a moment's notice gnawed at David's mind, a constant specter of dread. He had tried to move on, to find purpose in this new world, but the weight of his choices, of the blood on his hands, dragged him down like an anchor. He had pushed away his friends, his allies, even Samir, the bitter sting of her betrayal still fresh after all these years. A sudden knock at the door startled him from his brooding. He opened it to find a uniformed soldier, her face grim. "Commander Williams," she said. "You're needed at HQ. It's urgent." David arrived at the Neoterran Defense Headquarters to a scene of barely controlled chaos. Officers rushed about, shouting orders and poring over data screens. In the central command room, he found a group of haggard-looking leaders gathered around a holographic display. They looked up as he entered, their expressions a mix of relief and apprehension. "What's going on?" David demanded. Admiral Yamamoto, Evan's father and the current leader of Neoterra's military, stepped forward. "We have a situation. A rogue Elysian faction has launched a series of attacks on our border colonies. They're being led by a commander named Gallius. Intel suggests he's a hardcore zealot, hellbent on finishing what Ali started." David's blood ran cold. "I thought the aliens were honoring the truce." "The main government is," Yamamoto said. "But Gallius and his followers have apparently gone rogue. They're well-equipped and highly organized, and they're not just targeting military installations. They're hitting civilian populations, slaughtering innocents." A wave of nausea washed over David. The cycle was beginning anew. The horror, the carnage, it was all happening again. "There's more," Yamamoto said hesitantly. "We've uncovered evidence that Gallius is being aided by someone on the inside, someone with intimate knowledge of our defenses and protocols." He tapped a command on the holographic display, and an image sprang to life. David felt the breath leave his lungs. It was Maya, older now, her face harder and colder than he remembered but unmistakably her.
"No," David whispered.
"It can't be." "I'm sorry, David," Yamamoto said. "But it's true. Maya has been working with Gallius, feeding him information, sabotaging our efforts to maintain the peace." Rage and betrayal warred within David, a tempest of emotion that threatened to consume him. He had trusted her, cared for her, and she had betrayed them all. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "We need you to lead a strike team," Yamamoto said, "to hunt down Gallius and his followers and stop them before they can plunge us into another war. And if possible, to apprehend Maya, to find out what she knows." David nodded, a grim resolve settling over him. "I'll do it. I'll stop them, whatever it takes." As he gathered his team and prepared for the mission, David couldn't shake the sense of dread that clung to him like a shroud. He was an old soldier now, his body battered and his spirit weary, but he would fight as he always had for Neoterra, for the memory of Evan, and for a peace that seemed more fragile than ever. He just prayed that this time, the cost wouldn't be more than he could bear. If you appreciated this story and wish to show your support, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Additionally, for each comment containing 88, I will heart every single one. Thank you for your time.